Big conversation coming up with Tommy Knepper. He is the CEO of Infield Strategies. These are the guys knocking on doors in the battleground states. Without further ado, Tommy Knepper. Hey, Tommy, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we talk a lot about ground game, early vote, all this stuff, door knocking. This is what you guys do, right? This is your wheelhouse. You do this for groups and organizations for a living, right?
It is, yeah. We've been in business a little over 8 years now, and this is all we do.
Okay,
knocking on doors, turning people out.
Good, because we want to know who these people are that are knocking on our doors. What battleground states are you guys working in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're currently in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Michigan.
Okay. And what type of things do you guys do?
Yeah, so I mean, we're all encompassing grassroots. So we do some phone calls, text messages, but the majority of what we do is knock on doors. And so we are going knocking on doors, talking to voters. Leading up to this GOTV portion, a lot of it was persuasion, absentee sign-up chase. Right now, as we move into votes being cast, we saw in Georgia yesterday over 300,000 votes cast. It's all GOTV. So at this point, it's turning people out to the polls, getting them to cast their absentee ballots if they're permanent absentee voters. Then as we get closer to election day, obviously turning out voters to November 5th election. So our job is to knock on doors, make sure voters know what election is coming up, make sure they're voting for our candidates, and make sure they ultimately actually cast their vote.
All right, so let me break this down a couple ways. So who do you guys work for? Is it the PACs, the outside groups, the third parties? Who generally employs you guys, or is it the campaigns?
So in the past, we've typically worked for some of the big committees like the RNC, NRCC. Right now, we're working for some of the big PACs since they're absorbing a lot of the ground game. So we're working with America First Works and some of the other local PACs in some of these states. Okay,
so let's just role play this for a second. So they hire you guys, and then how does this work? You just go out, hire people, and say, here are the the doors that we want you to knock on?
Yeah, so it depends how early they bring us to the table. Sometimes they want our input in terms of who we think we should target. But assuming they have a big polling firm, data firm, and a lot of these national campaigns obviously do, they'll have the target universe they want us going after. We work with them to develop the script, the messaging, the literature, but they will have a print house, obviously, that prints the lit. Our main job is to go out, find the canvassers, hire the right people, train them accordingly, and deploy them to knock on doors, and obviously monitor them as they're knocking on doors, make sure they're returning good data, not cutting any corners, and make sure they're presenting the campaign and the PAC's message well at the door.
Okay, so you hire someone. I am a person. Do you want to get people who are voting for, say, Donald Trump, or do you want to knock on somebody's door that you could vote for Donald Trump and they're persuadable, or both?
So both. So we're a big fan of not leaving anything on the table. So right now we can use something called dynamic scripting with most of these walk apps we use. So if you're using, especially paid canvassers, professional canvassers, you can have them knock on one door where it's a pro Donald Trump voter, and make sure, and they have an absentee ballot, and make sure they remember to cast their ballot now because they live in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and absentee voting is opened already. And you can knock on the next person's door who is a persuasion voter and deliver with them a different script, a different message, trying to persuade them to vote for Donald Trump. And then you can knock on a third door who is not an absentee voter. They're an election day voter who might be a Donald Trump supporter, but you also want to remind them, hey, the election's coming up. Make sure you turn out either an early vote, like those 300,000 plus people did in Georgia yesterday, or turn out on election day, November 5th, to cast your vote for Donald Trump. So,
right. So what if what if you knock on a door and there's two people, a husband and a wife? How does the dynamic scripting allow you to say, Mr. Smith, I want to tell you about this, but Mrs. Smith, I know that maybe, or vice versa, like one's a election day voter, or maybe one's a persuadable, but one's a committed?
Typically, you'll try to target one person in the household with that main messaging. So you wouldn't try to target a household with the same household with a turnout message and a persuasion message. You would determine, maybe the husband is a mid-propensity but solid Trump supporting voter. You want to target that person with a get out.
But when you say you would, so the canvasser that you have, this is on their app. Is that how it works?
It is, yeah. So we train them accordingly based on the messaging that they're going to carry. But when they actually go out to the door, they'll be carrying their phone or tablet, a smart device, whatever they have, and that's actually on the app itself. And so the script will change based on the target person that we are going after. And so we're not leaving it up to the canvasser to figure it out. That data is in there. The script will change based on the voter they're targeting, and then they will relay that messaging that's now in the app.
Okay, so you knock on my door, you say, Mr. Spicer, you're a high propensity voter. We see you're supporting Donald Trump. And so, like, let's play this out. So, what do you say? Hey, do you have a plan to vote early, or what is it that you want to ask me? I'm a 404. I voted for Trump. What do you want? What do you want me to do?
Yeah, so I mean, typically in our world, we would, if you were a 404 voter and you're a perfect voter, and we know you're a Trump voter, we wouldn't knock on your door because we know you're
so that's important for people to hear. If you're a 404 voter, because I hear sometimes people say, I haven't gotten a knock on my door. It's because why spend the money?
Correct. We know you're going to vote, and we know you're a solid Trump voter who votes every single election. There's really no point in us spending the money to knock on your door or persuade you to do anything in the above, because you're going to vote. You always do.
All right, so let's say I'm a 2 of 4 Republican voter. You knock on my door. What are you going to ask me?
Yeah, so typically we will already know if you've requested absentee ballot or not. And so if you have,
I live in Virginia. I live in Virginia. Early vote has started. Early vote in person. What do you want me to do?
We want you to get out and vote early. So we want to bank as many votes as we can right now. We don't want you to wait until Election Day. That affects, the general mood of the electorate. The media will cover the early returns, the absentee returns, the early vote returns. They'll draw comparisons, faulty or not, but they will draw comparisons between the Democrat and Republican turnout. And so to the extent that we can tamp that down on our side, have more of our votes vote early, it helps tamp that down. It also allows us to shift our resources to those voters who have not yet voted. So if you're a 204 Republican, we're going to knock on your door 3, 4, 5 times before November 5th. But if I can get you to vote now, then we can remove you from our target list, which allows us to take those 4 or 5 knocks that would have gone to your door and shift them to somebody else and get them to vote, thus increasing our total vote across the state, across the region. And so we want you to vote as early as possible, because it allows us to save money and convert those resources to target additional folks who have not voted. So if in theory, if we can get every single 204 Trump voter to vote by, October 30th, that last week going into November 5th, we can shift everyone down to 104 Trump voters or 04 Trump voters and bank even more votes. And so the earlier that you can vote in these states, the better it is for us to save resources and continue to target, lower propensity voters.
All right. So you knock on my door. I'm a 204 voter. I say, hey, tomorrow afternoon, I'm voting in person here in Alexandria. Who gets that data? When you log that in, where does it go?
So it goes back into the data warehouse, and depending who which entity you're working for, most of the clearinghouse for us is through the data trust. And so the Republican side, it'll go back into a warehouse that is then shared with other groups that can legally access that data, and allows the holistic organization across all these PACs, the campaigns themselves, the committees themselves, especially with the new FEC ruling this year, where canvassing can be coordinated, or cooperative canvassing at least. We share all that data across the whole organization. They'll know who just got a knock on their door. They'll know what that data coming back says. The pollsters and the data analysts will be able to compare what you said at the door compared to what they had originally anticipated you saying at the door, and help us fine tune our messaging down the stretch. Or you go and you cast your ballot. We'll get that data back sometime next week. We'll remove everyone who did vote, and then we continue to refine our targeting moving forward. So that's the way it works. All that data is rolled back in. All of it is analyzed to make sure we're targeting the right people, first of all, down the stretch, and then making sure those people that are the right people are casting their votes as early as possible. So, I mean, in theory, though, I cast my vote. The ecosystem on the right knows that I've got a plan. I cast my ballot. I've already, by the way, I've said that just so the audience gets it. I did vote already in Alexandria. But once I do that, then you guys, it's the pollsters know that I voted, so they can factor that into their model. The campaign knows that they can stop sending mail to me. Not to knock on my door anymore. Is that kind of how it flows out? It does, yeah. And so, exactly. It's exactly how it flows out. And then the data component is important, because if we start seeing, for some reason, that a ton of our 204 voters in a certain demographic. So for your example, 204 males in a certain age range are voting really early. We'll want to double down on that demographic and turn more of those folks out as early as possible. And so the data component is important too, not only removing them from the overall targeting list that we save money, but also making sure that demographic that we're hoping is voting early is actually voting. If they are, double down. If they're not, figure out why they're not, maybe change messaging. So the whole system feeds itself. It feeds the messaging, the turnout operation, all of the above. And so, the more the data that you give us at the door, the more conversational you are, and the earlier you vote, the more it helps our whole team. Okay, so chat away when you get a knock on the door. Yeah. You mentioned a couple of these states. Let's start Arizona. Tell me about what's happening in Arizona and what we should be looking for. Yeah, and so we're, Arizona has a large absentee, vote. Obviously, they did change the rules a little bit from previous years to now, where you could cast a ballot, and I think they absorbed it up until 3 days after. Similar in North Carolina, in Georgia, so they changed that to where it has to be received by election day. So a lot of the GOTV in Arizona is happening right now because for you to mail your absentee ballot in, it really needs to be mailed by that last Wednesday or Thursday of October. In order to be received by election day. And so,
And it wasn't.
Arizona,
wait, so does that mean it wasn't last cycle? You could your ballot could come in after election day?
yeah, like in California, where you can receive it for a couple of days after the election still is counted, as long as it was mailed by election day is what mattered. So there's usually a 2 to 3 day window after election day where they could be counted, even if as long as they were postmarked by election day, received 2 days later, they could be counted. Arizona has changed that, and so it now has to be received in hand by election day, and so. Most of the Arizona GOTV is happening right now. I mean, that it'll run up until kind of that last week of October, and then most of the ballots will be cast. Now you can still walk your ballot in, obviously, on election day or that weekend leading up to election day. They'll have early vote locations open. But in Arizona, we're seeing an intense ground battle. It's really close. I'm sure you saw a lot of the polls come out earlier this week where Trump is gaining in a lot of these states. But large swaths of absentee votes will be counted. The data returns we don't have quite yet, so we'll start seeing that later this week and next week in terms of how many Democrats versus Republicans are casting ballots. But it's definitely a dogfight. Us Republicans have a very good organization. Trump plays very well there. It's going to be close, and so I think if you're in Arizona and you're a Republican, we need every vote that we can get as early as possible again, so we can continue to shift resources and target some down ballot stuff. There's a big abortion initiative on the ballot there too that's helping drive turnout on our side. So I think we've got a good shot. It's going to be a dogfight, and we need some ballots, cast early as possible.
But is it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the environment is more favorable to us than it was 4 years ago.
I think it is. I think, really across the country, it seems like it is. It's, a lot of people are undecided still down the stretch, but you're seeing that polling tightening. You're seeing the numbers in terms of absentee requests 4 years ago compared to now have flattened out, which is typically good for us. We perform a lot better on election day, and so a lot of these states that changed over and allowed much bigger absentee voting pools during COVID, that growth has plateaued, and so that's better for us in the long run because we can convince our voters to vote on election day a lot better than Democrats can. And so the fact that they haven't just continued this rise in terms of absentee requests on the Democrat side is good for us. And so I think it's better for us than it was 4 years ago. None of these states are automatic. It's going to be a dogfight in all of them. But I think we're in a good spot right now, with 3 weeks ago. Okay.
What about Georgia? I know we've gotten a couple days of early voting there. Do you feel good about Georgia? I know there's some people who are saying, well, a lot of the rural vote is coming in. It's a lot whiter. It's hard, I think, in my opinion, to try to discern what all of this means this early in early voting.
Yeah, until we see the breakdown, the demographic or partisan breakdown, I guess, of the vote that came in yesterday, we really won't know exactly how it's looking. That being said, the feeling on the ground is there. We worked, Brian Kemp's campaign last cycle, and it's got a lot of similar excitement. Maybe not quite as much with Kemp, just because he's a very popular governor, but very close to it, if not quite there. And so we're feeling that on the ground. While we don't have the exact data back yet, I'd say a good chunk of that vote that came in yesterday was definitely our voters, and they seem excited. They seem fired up. They seem tired of the Democrat nonsense. And so I think in Georgia, and you hear a lot of the mainstream media talking about PA and Georgia are going to decide this election. Well, I can say in Georgia, I feel pretty good. I feel better about Georgia than Arizona even. So I feel good there.
Really? Why do you feel better about Georgia than Arizona? That actually, I'm not sure if that makes me feel better or worse.
We need both states, obviously, but the feeling on the ground again. And so in 2016, actually, I was the Pennsylvania state director for the Republican National Committee. So where we flipped Pennsylvania the first time in 30 years. And it just has a similar feeling on the ground. The data wouldn't necessarily point to it, but when you're on the ground there, we've got a good sized staff working in a number of counties. And you just have this general feeling of the people coming out, kind of like you mentioned, the rural areas. The city vote is a little more in flux. You're seeing Trump making a lot of inroads with some minority communities, so especially in areas like Atlanta. And if the rural areas come out strong, it's similar to what happened in Pennsylvania in 2016, where the T of the state surged and you had less of the surge in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and Trump was able to win the state. So it feels like that same kind of election in Georgia this cycle.
So do you think when we hear about a big number coming out of Georgia, but a lot of it coming for rule, do you think that's Republicans getting on board of early voting, or is that Democrats doing their part, driving up their vote?
Yeah, I think it's mainly Republicans getting on board with early voting. I also actually, in a weird twist of fate, think the hurricane helped some of that. The Georgians, especially in some of those rural northern areas, realize, you can't guarantee the weather right now. And so the fact that they have the opportunity to vote, they're going out and voting.
Okay, interesting.
Early.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. You mentioned Michigan as another state. Tell me what you think that is.
Yeah, Michigan, I mean, the Rust Belt is one area where in the polling, national polling especially, you're seeing everything really tighten. If Trump can run the Rust Belt again like he did in 2016, then the race is over, right? So Michigan is another one where we're seeing it tighten. Seeing the across the board, actually, top of the ballot and down tighten up. We're working some down ballot stuff there too. So I think it's a tighter race. Again, I think Georgia is more winnable, but I think Michigan's there. I really think all 4 states that we're working in are very winnable. They all are going to come down to turnout operations, and they're going to come down to a dogfight in the street. So we have a pretty good operation in Michigan, knocking on doors. I think we're in a good spot, but again, we need as many votes cast as early as possible so that we can continue to drive our messaging, to lower propensity voters, because that's what the Democrats are going to do.
Remind me, what's the 4th state you mentioned?
North Carolina.
No, that's right. Okay, how does this storm affect North Carolina? That's been my big concern.
Yeah, so I mean, in the western parts of the state, they got slammed. I was reading this morning. I think they got, out of the early vote locations in that region, they were expecting to have about 80, and they got 75 open. So it sounds like they're figuring out ways to get majority of their early vote locations open still. There are a lot of people who had, their property and whatnot destroyed, a little more time to figure out a polling location, more early vote locations, more time to figure it out, allowing some of them, if they, live in that area and had their information destroyed, to cast provisional ballots, which will help us on that side of the state especially. So it seems like they're doing everything they can to give those folks access. Obviously their roads are destroyed, communications down in some areas still. So that will affect stuff. My hope is that they get all that fixed by November 5th, and, majority of those folks can still cast ballots. But it's as of this morning, the report for early vote locations was encouraging, but there's still a long ways to go to make sure all those folks have a chance to vote.
Okay. And how do you feel? How do you rank North Carolina as a state?
I think it's up there. I mean, I think the scandal around the kind of top of the ticket, below Trump, but top of the ticket in North Carolina hurt us a little bit. We're hearing some of that at the doors.
Really?
But Trump plays well there, and so I think he can pull. I think he'll still pull across the finish line. How many he brings along on his coattails, I'm not sure, but Trump at top of the ticket seems strong.
Okay, Tommy Knepper, CEO of Infield Strategies. Thanks for being with us. Really appreciate the insight on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. Thanks for having me.
You bet.